Welcome and Namaste. I'm Anaghababu, Assistant Professor, Political Science Department, Kumaraguru College of Liberal Arts and Sciences, Coimbatore, Tamil Nadu, India. Today at Parley Study of Politics Simplified, we would be discussing a major theory of international relations. So, the relevant topic that we would be discussing today is realism, a major theory in international relations. So, today we would be just looking into the basic understanding of realism, the kinds of realism, and the theorist for each variant of realism would be discussed in another video. So, let's begin the lecture. Realism is a theoretical approach to the study of international relations and thereby explaining world politics in terms of power. We know that in today's scenario, even political science is described in terms of power. Now, where would you trace the origin of realism as such? In the post World War II era, we are talking about the realism that we know today. Where would we trace its emergence? So, it is believed to have developed in the post World War II era as a reaction to the older school of idealism. So, we are referring to the neoclassical realism as such. And how do we understand realism today? We look at it as relations among nations, as they have been and as they are, and not how it is imagined to be. So, realism gets as real as it can. It presents the ideas as real as it can, right onto your face. There is no sugarcoating being done. There is no imagination to be done. Or as the idealist visualize, there is no utopia. Therefore, it is not concerned with the ideal world, but with an international interpretation of human behavior. Now, this interpretation of human behavior has changed with context of the various theorists in realism. This would be discussed in the upcoming video that I had mentioned. So, realism emphasizes on power, nation, national interest, security, and centrality of nation state. And realism, since it deals with the interpretation of human behavior, how do various theorists see, various realist theorists see individuals? So you could see a trait of Thomas Hobbes here because realists, they do see individuals as essentially selfish and they seek power to serve the interest and prevail over others. Therefore, there is a constant clash of divergent interest and seek to acquire power. This ever present struggle for power in the society among individuals is to be taken as a parallel having the same tone that guides different countries. So, the exercise of power by states towards each other is called power politics, or in terms of, or in the j- language jargon or the subject jargon, we would call it real politic. So I think we have delved into the idea of realism in this slide. So they compare countries to human beings as such. Now, international realism is characterized by conflict, suspicion, competition between nation states, just like how you could see it between individuals. This is a reference made by Scott Burchell. For realists, the reality of international relations is the anarchy of separate states that have no real choice but to operate according to the principles and practices of power politics in which security and survival are primary values and war is the final arbiter. So, idealism, they believe that in case of any sort of misunderstanding or any sort of conflict of ideas, the final report should be given to deliberation and discussions. But here, they believe only war is the final arbitrate in such a scenario. There is no result that could be, no proper result that could be delivered out of deliberations or discussions. And Thucydides, he summarizes this effectively. He says, the strong do what they have the power to do, and the weak accept what they have to accept. And this is exactly why each state tries to improve its power equations with regard to the other states. Moving on. So these are the various ideas or what you would call definitions given by various theorists and political thinkers on the idea or the theory of realism. Now, this is the most interesting aspect of realism. There are four principal generations that you could identify with the idea of realism. I have not included the classical thinkers like Kautilya, Machiavelli, and even much before Thucydides. I have not included them here. Thomas Hobbes, I have not included them here. I have included Niebuhr, E.H. Carr, who represent the interwar and the wartime generation, Hans Morgenthau, George Kennan, and Raymond Aron, who represents the post-war or the early Cold War era, the Détente generation by Kenneth Waltz, Stephen Krasner, and Robert Gilpin, and finally the post-Cold War generation represented by John Mearsheimer, Henry Kissinger, and Robert Schuman. So these four principal generations, you could actually see how the idea of realism also varies. But since our video is going to be a short one, I'm not going to include this here. I would include it only in the next video. The basic propositions of realist theory: groupism, egoism, anarchy, power politics. We had mentioned this in the first slide itself. Maybe a few countries would come together and protect themselves from any other threats. You could call egoism here when one country tries to buckle up its strength and power when it feels its immediate threats are doing better, or vice versa. Anarchy, I need not explain it here further. Power politics, we had just discussed about how constantly each country tries to be on a better footing than the other. So all these have been discussed here. The basic tenets or characteristics or features that realist theory puts forward. 1. The states are dominant actors in international system. States pursue power. Then the type of governance and internal structure are not a dependent variable of how the states behave with one another. So if a state is not a democracy, or if a state is following an anarchic government, it need not necessarily mean that the relations with the immediate neighbor could be good or bad. The type of government do not and the internal structure do not necessarily affect the behavior of the state. Now, The three S in realism, or the base of realism. This was well discussed by John Bayliss, Timothy Dunn, and Steve Smith in their article, The Globalization of World Politics. And they stated statism and survival to be major elements of realism. And later, self help was added into it by other theorists too. Now, let us look into this one by one. Now, statism is the centerpiece of realism. This involves two claims. First, that the state is preeminent actor, which means everything would be decided by the state, and all other actors in the world politics are of lesser significance. For example, let's talk about intergovernmental organizations or any other such groupings. That is not going to be of any significance because the state would be the prime player there. Second, the state sovereignty signifies the existence of an independent political community, one that has judicial authority over its territory. So the sovereignty of the state and the state in itself are the most powerful claimants with regard to realism. We come to survival. The primary objective of all states is survival. This is the supreme national interest to which all political leaders must adhere. So all the decisions that is being made, the policies which are being decided, they are basically to sustain the state. They're basically in the interest of the state, or to uphold the national interest. Now, self-help, to an extent, self-reliancy and the ability to take care of oneself is an important aspect in realism, because no other state or institution can be relied upon to guarantee your survival. So these are, if you want to survive, you have to help yourself, and these are the three S of realism. The criticisms are given along. Now, many claim the realist theory to be reductive, saying that it is a very narrow theory. It does not look into the broader idea of governance or politics. Then, of course, it is pessimistic in approach, because the human nature itself and the nature of states itself have been decided uh, on pessimistic lines as such. This theory is a theory that helps the powerful, because usually the powerful states are seen to be the ones who have the ability to command or make others listen to themselves. The male dominance worldwide portrayed, further wheeling the role of gender in IR. This theory does that. The obsession with power and security has to be checked. And feminist critics, they point out at the last point for criticizing the realist theory. They would look into the criticism of realism and the types of realism, which I have just mentioned here, the different branches. Classical realism, neo-realism, defensive realism, offensive realism. We would be going through these and the criticisms and the theorist in the next video. Thank you so much. If you have any queries, you could mail them to me. Thank you.